The 4th of July is a day defined by celebration, a time when the heat of the summer meets the vibrant energy of national pride. Along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, this energy often centers on the water. For many, the ultimate destination is Horn Island. It is a place of rugged beauty, a thin strip of sand and scrub pine sitting miles away from the mainland. It is part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, a federally protected wilderness where there are no roads, no houses, and no permanent human footprints. To go to Horn Island is to step away from the modern world. But for the family of Nolan Wells, this island would become the site of a mystery that has yet to find a satisfying conclusion. Nolan Wells was a young man with his entire life ahead of him. Like so many others his age, he looked forward to the holiday as a chance to relax with friends. The plan was simple: a boat trip to Horn Island to celebrate Independence Day. It was meant to be a weekend of sun, surf, and memories. No one could have predicted that by the end of the holiday, Nolan's name would be at the center of a national conversation about justice and transparency. When the news first broke that a young man had been found deceased on the island, the initial shock felt by the community was immediate. Horn Island is beautiful, but it can be unforgiving. It is a place where the elements are in total control. However, as the days turned into weeks, the grief of a family transformed into a search for answers. They weren't just asking what happened. They were asking why the answers were taking so long to surface. Before we dive deeper into the forensic details and the troubling questions surrounding this investigation, if you appreciate deep dive research into cases that demand transparency, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Brian Case Records. Your support allows us to keep digging into the stories that matter. The investigation into the death of Nolan Wells began under the jurisdiction of Mississippi state authorities. In any death occurring on the barrier islands, the process involves complex logistics. The body must be transported across the water back to the mainland, where the state medical examiner's office takes over. An official autopsy was conducted to determine the cause and manner of death. In most cases, this is where the story finds its period. But in the case of Nolan Wells, the official autopsy was only the beginning of a much longer, more complicated road. The family, feeling a lack of clarity from the initial reports, made a move that changed the trajectory of the case. They reached out to one of the most prominent civil rights attorneys in the United States, Benjamin Crump. Known for his involvement in high-profile cases involving the deaths of black men under suspicious circumstances, Crump's arrival signaled that the Wells family believed there was more to the story than what was being publicly shared by local officials. Crump's first major action was to coordinate a private, independent autopsy. This is a significant step. It requires flying in a specialist, in this case a forensic pathologist from Washington, D.C., to conduct an entirely separate examination of the remains. This is often done when there is a lack of trust in the state's findings, or when the family believes specific evidence may have been overlooked. The results of that private autopsy were recently shared in a press conference that left many with more questions than answers. Benjamin Crump stood before the cameras and delivered a word that no grieving family wants to hear: inconclusive. According to the private pathologist, a definitive cause of death could not be established. This doesn't mean the investigation is over. Rather, it means the case is now in a state of forensic limbo. The pathologist noted that the death is pending further investigation, a phrase that suggests there are missing pieces of the puzzle that the body alone cannot provide. However, there were specific details in that private report that caught the attention of the public and the media. The pathologist highlighted a red area on the back of Nolan's head. In the world of forensics, a mark like this can mean many things. It could be evidence of blunt force trauma, or it could be a result of the body's natural processes after death, known as livor mortis. Without further testing, it remains a point of intense speculation and concern. Perhaps the most jarring detail from the press conference was the mention of missing parts. The private pathologist noted that because this was a second autopsy, there were parts of Nolan's body that were not present for examination. It is standard practice during a state autopsy for certain organs or tissue samples to be retained for toxicology. or microscopic study. However, the absence of these components meant the private pathologist was working with an incomplete picture. This raises the question, where are those samples now, and what do they reveal? As we look at the timeline of July 4th, we have to consider the environment. Horn Island is a wilderness. There are no witnesses other than those who were there. There are no CCTV cameras on the dunes. There are no witnesses on the shore. The only people who truly know what happened in the final hours of Nolan Wells' life are the friends who were with him. To date, the accounts of that day remain a central focus for those following the case. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. It's your engagement that helps us continue to bring these facts to light and keep the memory of victims like Nolan Wells alive. The tension in this case stems from the silence. When a young man goes to an island with friends and doesn't come back, the vacuum of information is naturally filled with suspicion. The state of Mississippi has its procedures, but for a family waiting for a death certificate that explains the why, the wheels of justice can seem to turn at a glacial pace. The private autopsy's mention of the red area on the head is particularly significant when you consider the geography of Horn Island. Could it have been a fall? Could it have been an altercation? Or was it something else entirely? The pathologist's inability to rule it as the definitive cause of death means that toxicology will likely be the deciding factor. Toxicology reports can take months. They look for everything from alcohol and drugs to environmental toxins or signs of a medical emergency like a heart arrhythmia. Benjamin Crump has been vocal about the need for a thorough investigation that looks beyond the physical remains. He is calling for a look at the human evidence, the statements, the phone records, and the movements of everyone on that island. In a remote location, the timeline is everything. When was Nolan last seen? What was his state of mind? Was there any conflict within the group? The missing parts mentioned in the report also highlight a common point of friction in high-profile death investigations. When a state medical examiner retains organs, it is usually for the purpose of fixing them in formaldehyde to allow for thin slicing and microscopic examination. This is often the only way to find evidence of certain types of trauma or disease. However, when a second autopsy is performed and those organs are missing, it can lead to a sense of unease. It creates a narrative that the full truth is being held in a laboratory somewhere, far out of reach of the family's independent experts. The case of Nolan Wells is a reminder of the fragility of life and the complexity of the legal system. It is a story about a holiday that went wrong in the most permanent way possible. As we wait for the final toxicology and the state's full report, the public is left to weigh the facts we have. We have a young man, a remote island, a red mark, and a result that tells us nothing is certain. Every line of this story leads back to that beach on Horn Island. The waves continue to hit the shore, and the sand shifts with the wind. But for the Wells family, time has stopped. They are trapped in the inconclusive result, waiting for a piece of paper that will finally allow them to understand how they lost Nolan. As this investigation continues to unfold and more documents are released, we will be here to cover them with the same dedication to the facts. The search for the truth is often a marathon, not a sprint, and in the case of Nolan Wells, we are only at the beginning of the journey. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the first part of this ongoing investigation. If you found this breakdown helpful and want to stay informed on the Nolan Wells case as more results are released, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to Brian Case Records. We will continue to follow every lead and report every fact as they are documented. Stay tuned for Part 2, where we will examine the witness statements and the official state response. Until next time, stay vigilant and keep searching for the truth.